for the first two parts of this course, we've basically been doing a really kind of top line breakdown of how to audit / look into your own company, your systems, and I've tried to illuminate / give some clarity on on how to build out the understanding of where to look in order to place AI systems in, and some insight into what auditing looks like, some of the problems the system can solve, and I've tried to kind of connect these in a really top line way to kind of strip away a lot of the mystique and kind of complication around building these systems into business workflows. So with that being said, this is the third part in the series so far, putting it to work, what building an AI system actually entails front to back, and the parts that nobody plans for, which is the people. So we're going a little bit deeper today into these systems and my methodology for understanding how to implement them within businesses. So the story so far, if you've been coming to the course, you know where AI fits. You've costed what the problem is worth. Session 1 was kind of pattern work, not judgment work. Session two covered the audit, the numbers and hours that people spend on tasks. And today we're going to look at what actually happens when you build. So a system nobody adopts is just an expensive subscription. So this is kind of underlining again a point that I raised in the last couple of sessions, which is that we want to ultimately build most of our understanding about where these systems are best used by addressing the problem first. In the first two sessions, I covered how to kind of look into the business and where to look to see where these problems exist. So as we progress through this talk, I'm going to talk about kind of how to ensure that the problem you're solving works for the people who are going to be using the tool and what that really means in context. So the build front to back should cover 5 stages. The spec is the first stage. This is something that I spoke about in the first 2 sessions. The spec is another name for a kind of audit. So auditing the actual business, auditing the flow of data throughout the business, the people who touch the data at every stage is something I've been banging the drum about quite a lot. But the spec is kind of defining what done looks like straight out of the audit, what goes in to the system, what comes out, and who checks it. So if you have your AI system built, what data is going into it, what output are we looking for, whose job is it to check that? The plumbing is phase 2, which is connecting systems so information can actually flow. This is unglamorous and it's most of the work. So a lot of people in this space are thinking AI is kind of the magic behind the scenes, but it tends to be the plumbing, the connections, things like MCP servers, API keys. Where are we connecting AI to make it actually fulfill the role that we're purchasing the system for? The AI itself is kind of more in the background than is traditionally assumed. It's the plumbing, it's the connections, it's the access to data, it's the quality of that data that's really, really important. The workflow, so automations for the rules, language models for the meaning, 2 things combined from session 1 combined. So the automations are distinct from AI in terms of LLMs. Automations fulfill a deterministic purpose. So for example, check emails, tell me when the emails have been checked. That's a pretty terrible analogy, but that's essentially like a one-step process. Whereas LLMs themselves are better for reasoning, thinking about problems, more complicated, open-ended questions. But you want to distinguish between the two because your use case might not need deep reasoning, or it may, but you need to be able to define whether or not you want something that actually fulfills a deterministic purpose or something that has a kind of reasoning component. Across the board, you want to try and solve for determinism, generally speaking. All of these models are much better when you hand them deterministic problems in terms of in-context work within your business. If you're leaving a lot of open-ended questions in the queries that you're asking of these models, they will continue to give you vague, fluffy answers that are not helpful for business related outputs that rely on deterministic results and quantifiable outcomes. So that's a guardrails problem, and it will be part of the plumbing that you're building in phase 2. Testing on real work, super important. A lot of businesses that I've worked with including up until the current day, kind of expect the demo to be the final product. I don't know why this is it seems to be a bit of a misunderstanding, but AI systems are obviously a new technology. You're going to be building them out in a almost collaborative process with your provider. There are a lot of open-ended questions as to how sophisticated we can make solutions for this technology, because again, most of what is built and works is the plumbing, not the actual AI itself. So because of that, testing it on real work is super key. You're going to get a variety of different variables, and it will help you refine what that deterministic, repeatable result that you're looking for is. You're going to need to test it in real work use cases across real data. It's very easy to make things work in a kind of sandbox or a demo context, but when you're actually inputting connections to real databases with messy data, a system that I'm building as a case study right now is it's a system that basically takes bank account statements and analyzes them for data for a company. But again, it's easy to make something that digests documents in a demo, but when you actually plug it into real systems and then test it on actual statements from real people, the real life use case often throws up edge cases that you're not going to be able to predict in training. So whatever you build, make sure you bake into the timeline a period of potentially a week or 2 weeks purely for testing. And I think the expectation with the decision makers should be scaffolded from the beginning of the process. So they know, okay, we've got the system built. We are now entering an allocated test phase. This is something that is on the people who are working with the provider to lay the foundations for that kind of context to decision makers, because decision makers, once they've heard the product is built, will expect it to just be the magic box that they've paid for. It's very important that from the planning phase, you've scoped in time for testing. I've run into this issue with people before as well, where there is not an understanding of what testing really even means in the context of software development, which is the best way to look at this is kind of an ongoing software development exercise that your business is taking on. So testing phases are super, super important. I would potentially even argue that you should plan in 2 or 3 testing phases at different stages of the build for whatever solution you're building. So for example, maybe like a preliminary test on the most basic of functions that you're building, then an expanded test when you've plugged it into more of your working systems, and then kind of like maybe a holistic build test where you measure it in a real workflow against edge cases, have potentially members of your team working on the solution in the final test phase so they can submit feedback as well. But it should be very clearly outlined from the planning phase with decision makers and people with the money people in your companies who are actually paying for these solutions, that testing is part of the process, and they need to be conscious of that, because the chances of you getting an absolute perfect run on the first pass is unlikely. You're going to run into real life edge cases, and your own data stack and tech stack is probably not going to be as clean as the model would like. So testing is super important. Everybody from the top to the bottom of the decision tree should be on board with comprehensive testing. Sorry, not to bang the drum, but I have actually run into that a few times, and people don't seem to understand, or they underestimate the value of needing to actually test these systems once deployed in real use cases. And there needs to be some kind of tolerance for that from the decision maker standpoint. And then embed and iterate. So the system goes live inside the workflow people already use, and it gets better because they tell you what's wrong. This is like a reciprocal feedback loop that I would encourage teams to have an understanding of. When you're building these systems, feedback from the people using it day to day is super important. Changes can then be built into the system. Edge cases can be solved for. It kind of goes hand in glove with the test phase. It's ongoing. And I think another point of tolerance that should be baked into any planning phase when it comes to building these systems is that these things are kind of growing, evolving, ongoing, and it is new technology. So there should be a level of tolerance from the board or the decision-making side to say, okay, we're happy this works in its use case because we followed the first 4 steps, but what's the grand vision? How are we planning into the build to grow this system as the technology improves, as our understanding of our own workflows improves. We should take these projects on as kind of like a long-term build rather than like a quick solution. I think the mindset at the moment is very much like pay for a fix, product is bought, it solves a problem, we're done here. That's not the best way to look at this, simply because, again, it's a new technology, and because it's evolving so quickly, we're getting new models even every couple of weeks or every month or so. We're still very much at like the infrastructure layer of this stuff. Yes, indeed, you've got a question.
Yeah. Hi. Sorry. So just again, just so I can interpret this in my project management brain. So
Sure.
the 5 stages you provided is typical example in project management world where you are delivering an improvement to the system. Yeah. So I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, there are similarities in terminology, but obviously it's more tech speak. So my interpretation, just so I can check this, is when you say build,
Yeah.
are you talking about build in terms of using an AI agent to build an environment? So what I want to understand is how much of it is coding and how much of it is prompting using the requirements that you've established and fed into this agent to then help you produce the code to then help you build, or is it actually doing all those things from scratch to then get a code to then build? Does that make sense what I just asked, Omari?
Yeah, I think so. So you're basically asking if it's like code first or if it's the agent doing the coding to produce the final product. So that's kind of it's an interesting question. I think in the first instance, my personal perspective is like coding as a skill for humans is going to disappear pretty much. So I would think, this is just my opinion, but I think that in the next 2 years, there's going to be almost zero need for humans to learn to code. So most of code will be written by LLMs. And the reason I say that is because the bulk of the money that's being spent in the AI space is kind of going towards making that happen. so whether we're there quite yet or not, that gap will close completely. And so what will end up being the most valuable part of the, I guess, creative process when designing these systems is going to be the knowledge, intent, awareness, and then ability to articulate that reality on behalf of the human in the loop. So if you're architecting a system, your capacity for coding on a personal level is kind of broadly irrelevant at this point. I think what's going to be the most valuable thing is going to be your understanding of the system architecture. So how everything works in context, your ability to see gaps in that or find gaps in that, and then your decision tree for placing these systems inside that system. Because the business will already have its working kind of digital ecosystem, if you will. So you're kind of in the business now of finding creative ways to introduce, almost like with biology, when you're introducing a species into an ecosystem, you've got to be very precise and delicate with how you actually go about doing that, because it's going to have knock-on effects. It's not the cleanest analogy, but that's kind of where. So the decision comes less from almost the system, the AI itself, but more about the creativity of and the holistic view of your existing architecture. Okay, so you're kind of adding a piece to a puzzle.
Okay, so if I give an example, so I have an engineer who works on scheduling trains.
Sure.
Right? And he understands his workflow process. He understands the trains go at this particular time. What he wants, as an example, is he wants to be able to know way before a delay is potentially going to happen, maybe 3 tracks down on a route.
Yeah.
So if we're going to, I'm just trying to think. So if we're saying if he says, okay, he comes to us and he's like, okay, he wants to build something, and we are in an existing service provider. So for example, we are in a Microsoft tenant.
Yeah.
Right. And our Microsoft tenants, based on the license that we have, give us these plugin tools where we can build stuff. So I'm going to use the example very, very simply, an agentic agent as an example where you can build that. So person A, who is the engineer who wants to build this thing,
Yeah.
if he's trying to justify, one, us giving him access to this tool to build, yeah, and two, what he is building, I'm just trying to understand what is he going to present for us to give an approval? Does that make sense? As part of his business, what is he going to actually say? Okay, so he's not building the track.
Yeah.
He's not building the current system that we use to track the tracks and the trains and the scheduling.
Yeah.
Or he's looking to add, like you said, introduce something into the biology of how we're already doing this existing thing, right? So from his point of view, he's like, okay, I know I can build this. And we're like, okay, yes, you can build it, but how does the business justify the spend, which could be either cost, or time of said resource,
to
go and do this thing, which will give us improvements further down the line.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand, because at the moment what we're struggling with in my organization is having the use cases to justify the need. We all know there's a need for us to be able to have this in-house capability. And your conversation from the first session, which was you can either own your stuff, you can rent.
Yeah.
And it's just, again, we're sort of like in the middle of we might have to rent for a while.
Yeah.
And then we would have to own at some point, because the cost is just not going to make sense to keep renting.
Yeah.
And for us to sort of be always ahead, or at least in line with how the technology is evolving, we would have to build some sort of in-house capability. So we've moved past that, if that makes sense. So now we want to start exploring the in-house capability. And to explore the in-house capability, we then need to justify the reason why we need to do this spend, as an example. So I have an engineer who's like, yep, I know that I need this thing. I want to build it, but how does it justify it to me as the business?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think. All right. So this is interesting, and I think your question, from where I'm hearing it, is kind of more about scale versus individuality in terms of like allocating resources to
a combination of all
building
three
solutions. Because as a big business, you kind of have a bit of a unique like prism through which to view this, because you essentially can go, okay, cool, we've got one individual engineer who wants to build a system for his particular use case, but then we're going to have to allocate business resources to get that done. So you're kind of picking like a scope, and I think that for a large business, you almost want to have a bit more of a top-down approach. If you have kind of because and I say that to say, if you have kind of sporadic systems being built by individuals across the business, how are you managing oversight of those systems, and how are they integrating into a wider system? Or are you just like kind of releasing API keys to individuals to build out?
No, so the idea is, so if you look at it, the idea will be we pilot in one area and standardize. Because again, basically it's an engineer who works in rail.
Okay, yeah.
So it's to understand that, okay, if this engineer does this on this particular track or on this particular train line, and we adopt the same thing and scale. So the scaling is not necessarily a thing that we're going to be concerned about. It's to justify the initial, okay, yes, because you have this in your tenant, we trust you to go and do it.
So
how are you going to do it? Do you see what I mean?
Purely, yeah. I guess you're justifying it then through like the standard. Does it save time? Does it save money?
Yeah.
Is it can you project over a period of time that's going to save us more money versus not having it? Is it part of our holistic AI program that we're like, if it might look better as like a line item as part of the broader AI rollout, rather than kind of like an individual thing. If you go, okay, cool, well, these things are like our pilot tests, but they're part of like a larger sum of money we're already allocating to our AI.
It's that allocation that we're trying to justify. So we already have the landscape. We know that it's going to work. We know that we need this year, but the people who are going to sign off, the decision makers, the people with the money, they're not technical.
Yeah, I mean, they just want to see bottom line.
So for me to who understands sort of like the conduit between, okay, I know what the business wants and I know what the engineer can do. It's that middle line of, okay, what tool do you need? Oh, if I could just have access to a tool in, again, like very simple, a Microsoft tenant, and I know that I can build this. It's okay, but how are you building what it is that you're building? I'm just trying to understand what that process is, because I know that just with the way we're shifting and moving within my organization, those conversations are going to be had.
Yeah.
And if we don't want it to be, we're saying, okay, we're doing all these amazing things by improving the tendency, so the people will buy these tools from, but then we're limiting how they can use these tools. You see what I mean? So we can't give them in one hand and take it in another, because, you know, they can't justify, or we can't justify exactly how, what it is that they want to build, or exactly how secure it is. You know, those are all other conversations we can have. But in terms of you want a Lego brick, we've given you a Lego brick, but well, you can't really use the Lego brick because it's red.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real problem though, because you want everything to be built. Like, if you do need people, I guess, in an individual basis to build things that are bespoke to their use case, because they understand them the best. But then there does need to be like a holistic, unifying mandate, or there's a couple of ways you could do that. But in a big business, sometimes you're almost gonna need it to. You want it to be top down, so there's oversight, but you might need it to be bottom up because people have such specialized roles, and that's kind of one of the problems that this kind of stuff for enterprises is facing. I would say that you kind of want to look at the smaller builds, individual builds within a broader architecture, because, and the reason I'm kind of saying that is because I think from the business's standpoint, as these things build out, you're going to want these systems to be interconnected in some sort of way. You don't want everything to be kind of isolated, but but building out like a specific AI engine for a specific use case, again, if it's like a deterministic, this does this one job, then you're going to need to build in like outputs that then can be read by a larger system, and everything kind of feeds in, because you're going to want a holistic kind of map of how this stuff moves in and out of the bit, because again, otherwise you're going to end up in a position where there are these isolated input outputs and people don't understand where this data is coming from and what it means. Do you know what I mean? So it's I think the step is to kind of almost work from the top down and kind of scope in where that fits as part of the larger build, and then how, if you're kind of building out multiple different things across different parts of the business, engineering from the get-go how those systems are going to interact and talk, and where their kind of like data store is going to be, whether that's through a sophisticated like Postgres database that they all have access to, or you know, you're going to want like a holistic, almost like a learning engine, so that you're not trying to back engineer that later once you've got loads of outputs.
And that learning engine doesn't necessarily have to be strictly done by somebody who is a coder.
No, again, I think like it's more about understanding the business architecture and how you and building like an AI system on top of that from like an architectural standpoint, because I don't think that necessarily being able to code is the limiting factor here. What's actually happened, which I find quite interesting, on a quick side note, is people who had like a legacy career in coding, AI has almost exposed like a lack of creativity. So they probably have a better understanding of like pure code or like computer science, but they don't necessarily have the creativity of someone who is like a creative by nature. So you tend to get people who are kind of becoming like system architects and helping businesses with solve these kind of problems tend to be more creative, because now the barrier to coding has kind of been, yeah. So you want obviously people who have a professional experience to like check things, but at the same time, the creativity required to look at these problems isn't necessarily a coder's. I'm sure there are people who code who have that, but I'm just saying it seems to have gone.
It's not a real requirement as such. Okay, understood. Thank you.
100%. Okay. So yeah, I mean, we've kind of talked about this now, but most of the build is going to be plumbing, not the AI itself. So this is literally what we kind of ended on there. A clever model is kind of the easy part now. These models are getting incredibly sophisticated. They can fulfill a lot of the use cases we point them at, but the real work is getting your information out of the places it's stuck, cleaning it up, and connecting it to the systems that were never meant to talk to each other in the first place. So this is the holistic approach that I was kind of discussing before, where you want to plan from the build phase the architecture. So we're not building in isolation. Oh, we'll build one part of the, like if you're building a shoe, like, oh, I'm going to build the sole over here, the bubble in the back over here, the laces over here. You kind of want to have a holistic picture of where you're going, and then build it all in tandem would be my advice, testing it perhaps in small segments, but in the context of a larger picture.
Okay.
So the good news is that this means that the quality of the build depends on how well people understand the business, not on secret technology. So it's a thing you can judge. Again, it's something I keep coming back to, but when I speak to businesses, I'm consistently surprised by how little like the people with the decision-making power actually understand their own business, but because they've never had to. It's siloed. They're money people. There's usually like the money people and the systems people. They need to talk and meet and have a lot more of a kind of intimate relationship when it comes to understanding how data moves in and out of businesses. I think I've said that phrase a million times, but data and its passage through the business is the most important thing right now. In terms of integrating AI, you need to know where it comes in, where it leaves, how it's stored, what format it's in. These are all questions that people need to be able to answer, I would say, before even architecting the system, because that is going to influence the tech stack, which is going to influence where the AI can connect to, what it can see. It affects everything. In a similar way to how we have org charts where you can see who's in the business, there should also be like a tech org chart potentially, so people can see how the tech stack is set up, what goes in, what comes out. So you don't need a big team. You need 3 people, depending on the size of the business, obviously, but someone who can say yes, decisions in days, not committees over months. Someone who does the task today. They know where the bodies are buried. They test it. Their name goes on it. And someone with the keys, access to the system the build has to touch. So this is kind of your AI integration team for your business. Somebody who's kind of got like a key to all the CRMs, knows how the system architecture works, and can take ownership of scoping out the build. Weeks to working, months to proven. So a well-scoped first system should be working in weeks, not months. That's contingent on the scope being deterministic, but its value shouldn't be judged for at least 3 months once it's embedded. So let's say it takes, let's say it takes a month to get built. We should then be evaluating it at month 4 in terms of its output and its usefulness. And along that path, you should really be auditing and checking if people are actually using the system, because again, another thing that's happening a lot, and I come to in a later slide, is people kind of build these systems, then no one uses them for a bunch of reasons, which we will get to. But yeah, we need to have a long-term view. It's really a new system that's going to grow with the business. So there needs to be tolerance for that from the perspective of people making the decisions and spending the money. As I mentioned before, models are coming out, we're getting like 3 models every couple of months. We're very much at the beginning of where this is all going. Anything that gets built is going to be able to improve massively over a very short period of time. So there needs to be some understanding that anything you build is going to be like a growing system. This technology is moving very fast. Nobody can really, the moment you've built something, there's going to be something better. But the model, you'll be able to iterate that. But the people who are making the decisions need to understand that this is like a kind of going to be, in some regards, like a modular, constantly updating system rather than something that's like fixed and static. And that should be also built in and factored into the plan. So the tech is the easy half. Every abandoned AI tool I've seen has failed on the same thing, and it wasn't the technology, it was the people it was built for never made it theirs. So why the teams reject the tools? These are the 4 main reasons. The first one is obvious, like, are we being replaced? I think a lot of kind of unspoken, almost like an unspoken union in workplaces where people are like, we'll just not use it because we know they're trying to replace us. What's in it for me? All the benefit flows upward. None of it flows amongst the teams. It's extra work. If you haven't got a team who are specifically tasked with building and implementing these things, people are having to bolt on a new skill set onto their existing jobs, which everybody's already overworked and underpaid. So people are not keen to take on the responsibility of now building out a system which is going to replace them. And nobody asked whether people even needed these tools a lot of the time in their workflow. Would it help you? Would it not help you? There's no negotiation with the teams at the bottom. This is just a decision being made at the top, with again very limited understanding of even how these systems are going to be built and enter their business. So it's very disruptive in all of the wrong ways if done incorrectly. So how you get a team to actually use it: involve the doers from day one, help them shape the audit, help them test the build, and name its flaws. So the people who are going to be using the system should be incorporated into the planning of the system build, in my opinion. I advise businesses to build with the intention of augmenting their human teams rather than replacing them. I've had CEOs literally jump on calls with me and say, "How do we fire everyone?" I think this is like a terrible approach. I think that we should be trying to help people save time and hours within their day, freeing them up for more creative and more kind of human-based tasks, rather than replace them outright. Answer the fear directly. Tell them how the system is helping them, rather than replacing them. Launch narrow, so one team, one process, working properly before it goes anywhere else, but with a holistic plan of where it's going to go, rather than just building in isolation. Fix what they flag visibly. So feedback loops amongst the actual users of these systems are super important. For example, with me, if I build a company, a system, I want to hear from them every week in terms of feedback. What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And then I improve it. We can iterate upon it as the build progresses. And give them time back openly. Show them the hours they've saved and show them how that system's actually helping them in their day-to-day work, and potentially frees them up for more productive work. The grind comes off, the people stay. So the recruitment firm from session 1, screening went from hours a day to minutes. Nobody lost their job yet. Consultants got their day back for the work that actually needs a human touch, the relationships, the judgment, the placing. That's the story you're aiming for, and it's a story that makes the next project 10 times easier to get approved. In theory, there are those CEOs out there who actually want to replace team members. That's kind of something that you have to discuss internally, depending on the objectives of the business. But I would say in the first instance that these systems are not, in my opinion, designed to replace people entirely. I think that you want a dedicated team of people, or at least 1 or 2 people, whose job it is to run, manage, and maintain the system. I think we should be looking to augment human work rather than replace it. That's my moral argument for ethical AI. Count your subscriptions. So list every AI tool your business pays for, mark which ones you genuinely miss, and ask what happens if the price doubles or if it vanishes. That last point is actually quite key, and I think that it's a good time to, I guess, talk about whether or not we're owning or renting. It's a bit of a underground story still, but the API costs, for those of you who know what API keys and API costs are, the calls to models that are built into these bespoke systems are going to massively balloon. It's the worst kept secret in AI that these companies are kind of like billions of dollars in the red. So they're going to have to at some point recoup those costs. Some of it's going to be through advertising. So if you're using Claude or something like that, soon there's going to be ads inside the platform. There's going to be a bunch of SEO related advertising coming to these platforms soon. Agentic advertising is coming soon, but also the token cost is going to massively increase. So expect that, which is the bad news. The good news is if companies have a bit more risk tolerance, they can spend to train their own models now. That's the route I would recommend going down. If you're a bigger enterprise, again, to your point, Ndidi, maybe test it on renting and then move to owning. You can use things like LangChain. I'm not sure if you're familiar with LangChain, but it's basically a coding language which allows for relatively easy slotting in and out of models. It's designed specifically for that. So you can build these systems with centralized legacy models like your Claudes or your ChatGPTs, and then you can swap out for local models without changing too much of the architecture using things like LangChain. So it's not impossible. You can still build the system and then swap out the models, but the training of those models is going to become its own problem. So that's what you need to look out for there. Plus the hardware costs of running them, unless you cloud host them. There are a lot of different ways to skin a cat, but my advice for long-term thought planning is probably going to be hardware focused. Run everything yourself on your own hardware. I think that's where a lot of the stuff is going to go for people who have the money to do that. The second tier will be your own models, but hosted in like a cloud situation. That will also be massive. And then the third tier at the bottom is going to be people who still continue to use your Claudes, your ChatGPTs and stuff, because the model training itself for the first two tiers is going to be a longer undertaking. But I think companies who do that will see the value massively in the future, especially when their internal systems become so good that people are now trying to buy them, and they're trained on their own models, and now you've got this infrastructure and stuff kind of down pat. There's massive opportunity in the future for businesses who take it in-house and develop out their own solutions now. But that opportunity window is going to go away. So I would encourage larger businesses who have a bit more financial risk tolerance to seriously consider mapping those kind of things out from now, rather than just accepting that they have to use existing models, because they don't. Cool. Okay, so that's where this session ends. There's one session left where we're going to talk about owning it rather than renting it. But I would love to open the floor for questions for anybody who has anything to ask, anything you want to say, notes, thoughts, feelings, musings, before we wrap up the call. But thank you very much for your time. Oh, and I run a business audit on my website. You can check it out. I'll provide the link to Kevin. Anything I can do to help, always happy to. So thank you very much.
Very random question, sorry. So you know how you made reference to obviously the tokens and how your most users are currently using it for free.
Yes.
With the shift in, again, cost, impact, these companies have to, obviously they've been valued at stupid amount of money, and they have to sort of justify that cost one way or the other. Does that mean the free for day-to-day end users will be impacted to some level? Is that where you think the shift is going? I know it's a long roundabout way of it being related, but I'm just thinking, because as someone who uses obviously Claude and AI and ChatGPT and Copilot, you know, I've experienced longer sessions before my tokens go, and now those sessions are fast becoming very short. So just free gonna go, and then we all have to pay at some point.
So it depends on. So I'm assuming from your question you're using it on like the free tier.
Yeah.
So the token limits on the free tier are kind of like really small anyway. So the paid versions have much higher token limits. But I don't know if the free version will necessarily disappear. But I do think that these companies are going to be incentivized to raise the prices for tokens across the board. So I don't know what they'll do with the actual subscription fees. They might just raise those unilaterally. But in terms of the actual API, which is what people are building into software, which is like a tool that sits outside of your subscription, it's like a separate API cost. Those API tokens are going to
skyrocket.
Yeah, I mean, they could do anything from like a 5 to a 10x in cost, depending on
what you need it for.
Yeah, depending on the market pressures, depending on like, because it becomes everything from GPU cost to from their perspective, it's like how many GPUs are we having to activate? It's hard to it's really hard to say, but they should increase quite significantly. So it means that a lot of these solutions that are built around Anthropic and Claude and Microsoft APIs are going to get much more expensive. It's hard to say exactly what that cost is going to be, but it's all to do with the availability of GPUs across data centers, and the associated cost of building those out, which is obviously like everyone's trying to race to build data centers at the moment to have these GPUs, and it's affecting like RAM costs and things like that. So all of this stuff is connected.
Yeah, I mean, just
It's hard to
HP have just sent a price, a costing. They've increased, how much laptops we can actually buy. The actual cost of a laptop to roll out has increased, and I'm just like, wow. Okay.
Even Apple have changed all of their products on their website, so you can't spec them as high with things like RAM anymore because all the RAM is literally being rerouted to data centers. Personal computers are getting much more expensive. RAM and GPUs are going to become much more expensive. But I don't know. It's hard to predict where this is going to go. But I think there should be a price correction with all of this stuff soon. It's hard to predict.
The product life cycle, the innovators make the most money, and then the laggers get whatever is left.
Yeah, well, until it can become, it's hard to say, but ultimately, I think what they want to do is they want to build out so much that they can then drive the cost down again. But all of these companies are massively in the red, so I think they're going to be under pressure from shareholders to turn a profit at some point in the near future. That's probably gonna. The event horizon of that conversation is probably going to arrive around the same time as the RAM costs and all this stuff reach like a peak. So they're going to have to do something to recoup those costs at the end of the day. So it's either flood you with advertising, which will happen probably anyway, or they're going to have to raise the API costs and subscription costs as well. But we'll see. Maybe all the data centers go up soon after that, and then it'll come back down again.
And then go down. Okay.
Yeah, because it's an infrastructure problem more than anything. But we'll see.
Thank you. Thank you for the session. It's been really, really helpful. It definitely gives me context.
Thank you for your feedback.
Things are shifting and moving. So yes, really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much, Amari. Thanks indeed for your input. One more session to go. So same time next week, 11 o'clock Tuesday. Own it, don't rent it.
Yeah.
It's a topic that Aditi spoke about. So looking forward to that one. So thank you very much again, and we'll see you all next week.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.